We're back to recording. I periodically I forget to do that, and of course, as you get to the bitter end, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to record it. So,
Yeah,
oh well.
perfect.
I don't know who William Mitchell is, but he's trying to connect,
Hmm.
and we're all pretty early still. I don't know
Yeah,
who, I never know who's going to show up, if anyone's going to show up. So sometimes it could just be the two of us, and who knows.
yeah,
How are you doing though? How's everything on your end?
yeah. We're doing pretty good. We're just kind of rocking and rolling and really keeping up with the kids. As you know, it keeps you busy. They're 12, almost coming up on 13 and 14 and a half.
Wow, really? Oh,
Yeah, seventh and
yeah.
eighth grade. My daughter will be in high school as a ninth grader this fall. It's
Boy,
just
I
hard
remember
to
when you
believe.
weren't a whole lot older than that.
Yeah, exactly. Right out of high school, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. How did your trip go to Adidas and to Culture Studio?
Yeah, it was really good. Adidas is cruising along pretty good. It seems like they really didn't have like hardly anything. I was waiting for a laundry list of stuff before and to try and, troubleshoot and figure out all this stuff. And he's like, we have so many other little things to chase on just a regular basis. He's like, your products are working great. And I mean they really hammer on their stuff too. I mean, they had a stack of frames that had puncture holes in them, from
Huh.
like just flat out abuse. And so when they're going through that and the fabrics are surviving and they're not taping on the bottom side and it's it was good to see. So that was encouraging. I hadn't been there since before COVID.
Yeah, I did some work at Adidas quite a few years ago. They were having a issue with foil, and I was brought out there by foil company. And unfortunately, sometimes when you deal with the big companies, they get locked into this is what they want, this is the way they want me to do it, this is the way I'm going to do it, even if it's totally wrong.
Hmm.
And it was like, okay, you want to keep running a 20% second ratio? You go for it. Doesn't cost me anything, but um, they're an interesting company. I
Hmm.
was informed years ago that they never use spatulas on their screens, that they put a glove on, scoop up the ink, put it in the screen, throw away the glove. And of course, everybody says, really, what about all that excess ink? And it's like, I don't think you understand what it costs if they go down.
Mm,
And so when I was
exactly.
there, sure enough, they were using the gloves and not worried about cutting mesh. Uh,
Hmm.
my guess is if they were ruining mesh, it was probably a reclaim.
Yeah, exactly. Because they tried some auto reclaim units, and I think they've tried two different ones, and that was coming in right before the last time that I was there. They were kind of getting a spot set up for it, and when I came, I was really honestly expecting just to see a whole big setup of that, and that whole area was gone, and
Huh,
they've got like two to three guys pressure washing in the back. They're doing all of it by hand because they
really?
couldn't get them clean enough, or it just wasn't working for whatever reason. And they did have some kind of neat little robots. It was just kind of a fun thing to see. So on their screen racks that they really implemented once they got our frame system in, they were planning on doing it anyway. But they had when we first went there and they hadn't incorporated our system yet, they had frames just stacked up everywhere,
Yeah.
leaning against each other, kind of a recipe for disaster. So they had invested in screen racks about the same time they got into our frame system, and they built kind of a structure cart underneath a lift kit really for the rack, so that this little robot that's probably, I don't know, 2 by 2 foot can drive underneath it. It puts a pin up underneath and it's programmed to take it. to a certain press. So it'll deliver a job full of screens that are ready to go, or pick up dirty ones and bring them back to
Huh.
the station. So that was kind of fun to see. There's pros and cons with all that kind of stuff they said, but seems to be working. So that was kind of
Yeah,
fun.
I've gone to a couple of shops that are using a new blue water claim system from Easy Way,
Mm,
and theirs actually seems to be doing a really good job
mm,
in terms of not leaving a whole lot of anything behind. Um, the amount that I saw behind was negligible. Where
wow.
I've seen some of the other systems on the market where as they come off the machine, they put them straight into the sink to finish them out,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
to me, it's not that it doesn't make sense because if you're doing enough screens, it certainly does move that much more product along.
Hmm.
But I worked with one that was working with the Dane system. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And
Yeah.
they were going through about 800 screens a day. And so as they came off the Dane, they had to hit them with pressure washer in the sink. But they were able to certainly keep up with it. And the company I went to that had the blue water system, uh, hardly used the sink at all.
Wow. So is the blue water system, is it just pressure nozzles, or does it have brushes in it, or?
I have to admit I don't know. I have to look into it. All I know is the particular company had a different system for a number of years. When they moved their location, they scrapped the old system, which they weren't unhappy about when they first got it because it was one of the better systems around, noisy
Hmm.
as hell. Um,
Hmm.
they got in the blue water system and they're in love. It just seems to do everything that they needed to. They're not going through hundreds and hundreds of screens a day, though.
Yeah.
Um, and there is definitely a difference. I mean, the Dane system that I saw, you couldn't put 800 screens through blue water in one day,
Mm.
in
Yeah.
a proper time frame. Where with the other system, they had the Dane system, and I mean, not that it didn't do a good job, but they automatically just took them and hit them again. I also saw the M&R system in action. I haven't seen it lately, but when I did, they too had to go right into the sink
Hmm.
and hit it with a pressure washer, which it does save some time.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think the only positive thing out of it is in terms of screen frames, they're not being handled as much. So the chances of ripping mesh is reduced pretty dramatically because they're only
Yeah.
really grabbing a screen at a time and then moving on. Um, Certainly, from having been around, I'd say 80% of the screens that get lost and reclaimed. Uh,
Yeah.
Rare for the other things to happen, squeegee falls or flood bar falls or something. Yeah, it happens. You know, Actually, I've had a couple of people who had problems stretching for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason. I don't know. I know Andy Anderson was in touch with your mom. He was working with a company and he's pretty good about what he does. And when he
Mm.
has screens blow out on him, something just didn't quite hit right. And
Yeah.
of course, what you guys do is partially manual.
Yeah.
And so there's always room for potential error there. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's an uncommon thing, but it does happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. We try to point at ourselves first because we know we're capable of definitely doing some things. Um, but yeah, it's interesting on some of those auto reclaim units for what they're, this time savings, like you said, but then also, well, I was mentioning about asking about the blue water system on the brushes, or if it was just pressure nozzles or whatever. I know one company up in Canada that we've been sending panels to for really probably a couple decades. been a really good customer, but they do a lot of high-end graphic work, and they ended up getting a Dane system, and I know that it is definitely causing some premature damage and issues and everything. I think that it does probably a really good job of cleaning, but I think it's at the cost of possibly weakening and damaging the threads because they do actually have um, brushes that contact the screens in there.
Okay.
And when you're dealing with fine mesh counts, which most all of their stuff is 255 and up, 255 to 355,
Yeah.
it's it's just too it's too abrasive. It's too much, and it's really hard to track it down because I think what it does is it weakens it over time. It's not an instant blowout. You don't come out with holes in it. You come out with just weak points, and then it
Well,
makes it really difficult to put your finger on exactly what the cause is.
anytime you have an S mesh, the chance of moving a thread is that much greater. And
Hmm.
so you wouldn't see a hole necessarily, but if that thread is starting to move, then it's
Yeah.
just a very weakened area. That's the problem with 150S. A lot of
Hmm.
people say, "Hey, I love it. I get a great white lay down on textiles," and it's like, yeah, but the downside is, you give it a little bit too much pressure on press, and you're moving those threads, and it's going to die on you. Uh,
Hmm.
and I've got a couple of clients who say, "I don't care. I know it's not going to last that long, but for what it does when I'm using it, to me, it's worthwhile." I
Hmm.
think everybody, there's a tendency of going overboard on the value of mesh sometimes.
Hmm.
Certainly, oh, and there we are. We're at kickoff time.
All right. Perfect.
Well, okay, now that we're almost done, we can,
Yeah. Talk to you later, Charlie.
well, there you go. The reality is, certainly mesh is one of the consumables, like it or not. And the finer the mesh, the easier it is to lose it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, the benefits of having a finer mesh are the quality of your print, and in a sense, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but oh yeah, I'm not using as much ink. It's like, really, oh, instead of 10 cents, you're using 9 cents worth of ink. That's going to
Hmm.
make, at the end of the year, that's going to really put a lot of money in your pocket. And the answer
Yeah.
is no, it won't. What's really more critical is the quality that you're getting off of it, based on the tension, based on the thread being a finer thread.
Hmm.
Um, and will you lose some screens? Of course, you're going to lose some screens. Welcome to the world.
Yeah.
Uh, there are those who don't, that are extremely careful with what they do,
Hmm.
to the point where they would probably make more money if they lost some screens rather than being so overly cautious. But
Yep.
printers are like anyone else. They're very wrapped up with the consumable situation more so than the productivity side.
Hmm.
And of course, with some of the newer inks and some of the old ones, I mean, if you're doing a long enough water-based run, shoot two sets of screens because you're probably going to break down on one of them.
Yeah.
And if you're
Exactly.
doing any kind of long run, even if it's plastisol, having a backup set costs very little versus
Hmm.
downtime.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
you know, it's just a really interesting thing how people are more tuned into, I don't want to do that. You know what it costs me to do that extra set of screens? It's like, you know what it costs you when you go down?
Exactly.
But um, that's part of why I do what I do, and that's part of why there is a fair amount of need to have people who get out there and kind of push the idea that you need to look at your productivity and your quality and not worry too much about the cost of a gallon of ink or a quart of or a gallon of emulsion or a piece of mesh. I mean, it's not the end of the world.
Hmm.
You're going to consume all of those things.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, how long do you think that you're going to keep running, Charlie?
Till I'm pushing daisies.
That's right.
You know, being home for 3 years, well, close to 3 years during COVID.
Hmm.
Drove me out of my mind. I mean, I was
I had
used
a
to,
feeling you were going to say that.
well, prior to COVID, I averaged out close to 200 days a year on the road. Okay. Between
Hmm.
travel, even some vacation time, et cetera, but away from home, whether my wife and daughter were with me or not, but roughly counted, I have to count every year for my accountant. So it's somewhere between like 192 and 202. All right.
Hmm.
COVID hit. I came back from Egypt on March 4th of 2020. Last week was my first out of the country trip for a business trip.
No kidding.
So over 3 years.
Wow.
And in between, I did one trip in August with my family. We went to Norway. That was a vacation. That
Hmm.
was it. That's been all of my overseas travel where I would put on close to 100,000 miles a year
Hmm.
traveling. And I think right now I'm at United on a gold level. And I think I'm on gold level because I'm gold for life because I've got 1.5 million miles with them. But normally uh,
Wow.
I'm at that platinum level or getting close to that 1K level. Gold level is,
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure I hit gold, but still, uh, you know, it's less than 50,000 miles.
Yeah.
Maybe it is 50,000, something like that. I'm not
They
sure.
don't pick you up in a limo anymore.
They never did. United was never that good. The only one that picks you up. So I have a friend in Holland who worked at that time for Murakami, not Murakami, Mamaki.
Oh
And
yeah.
so he had to do a trip. And if your trip is anything over X amount of hours, you can go business class
Mm.
and the company will pick it up. Okay. So, what was it? United Arab Emirates Airlines
Oh.
had a
Hmm.
deal going. If you book business class with them, they will upgrade you to first class.
Oh wow.
Not only first class in one of the pods. I don't know if you know
Oh
anything
man.
about those. So
I've
Mike
always
books
wanted
into
to.
it. And so the first thing they do, they come into his pod and they ask if he'd like to take a shower. It's
Holy
like,
Toledo.
okay. Then they send a chef in to actually cook a meal for him
Oh
in his
my
pod
God.
while he's in his robe, just kicking back.
Yeah.
And at the end, he's a cognac drinker. So they have Louis the 15th cognac at 500 and some odd dollars a bottle. And would you like a drink? He killed half the bottle. So
So they
when you,
had to give him a ride afterwards.
well, what they do if you're on first class with them, they pick you up from where you are in the Mercedes, bring you to the airport. They take you through the back channels to get you through customs.
Oh, no
They
way.
then have a lounge specific for first class, which they then take you onto the plane. When you get to your destination, they have a limo waiting for you to take you to your destination. And
Unreal.
in general, all that for about $25,000.
Yeah. What a deal.
Anyway,
That's
no,
pretty cool
United
though.
doesn't do that. And no, they've never offered it to me. And if they do, I'd be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so do you go under Bill or do you go under William?
Bill's fine.
All
Yeah.
right. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you guys doing?
Waiting for you. Anything that we can address for you?
Well, I've been thinking about Shur-Lock panels, so that's I'm kind of interested to get some info on it.
Good. Well, that's what David is here for. The best part is I can sit back and just listen.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'm good with that. Go for it, David.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, hi, Bill. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, David. Good to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in here. This is really, really cool. I was wondering on who we'd get right after a holiday weekend as I was looking at the dates and everything. I
I
think a lot
know.
of people maybe needed an extra day after the weekend.
I don't know.
but
You know,
small and
as a screen printer, I never took Memorial Day off for the most part, but oh
yeah,
well.
yeah. But small and concise here is perfect. So I'm glad that we get an opportunity to chat here, even face to face, Bill. So tell me a little bit about what you're using right now and what you've heard about Shur-Lock and maybe some size constraints or ideas that you have.
Well, I was a manual printer for 30 years,
Oh
and
wow.
back in the beginning of the year, I bought a used auto, and so I've used Newman frames for 30 years,
Oh,
um,
okay.
and I've just bought mesh and stretched them myself, and it has worked well for me.
Okay.
With the auto, it came with static frames. The gentleman that I bought it from gave me the frames he had. He
Mhm.
retired, so I bought all of his screen print equipment.
Excellent.
And so I have some statics now. I had a handful of 23 by 31 Newmans that again I've just stretched with mesh that I had here. But I'm considering going to the Shur-Lock panels.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So you've got 2331 Newmans. You're happy with those, and you are looking to put some panels on there. Do you happen to know if they are M3 or MZX? A lot of
I think they're the smaller ones, which I think is the MZX.
MZX. Do you use a 5/8 socket to tighten up the
Yeah,
end bolt?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Well,
that should be
I have some of the larger frames that I use for flat stock printing.
okay.
And those are M3s. The
Oh, okay.
bigger.
Bigger, but made like a 2536 or something, probably
Yeah,
oversized.
they're like 30 by 40.
Oh, okay, even bigger. Okay. Yeah, excellent. We may even make a panel for that if you ever have a need for it. But yeah, 2331 MZX is mainstream size for us for sure. So I'd be more than happy to, if you want to try a few out, I'd be more than happy to send you a couple free samples
Oh, super.
first off to so that you can print with them, try them out, see if they work really well for you. But as far as mesh counts go, what type of printing do you do typically? And are you looking to change that up or?
Well, I do a lot of white on dark,
Okay, yeah.
like everybody, and mostly I use 156 for that.
Hmm.
Um, and then for top colors and simulated process, I'll use 230.
Hmm. Yeah, perfect. And yellow, I'm assuming mesh
Yeah,
color. Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's absolutely achievable. We could send you one of each of those and you could try them out and
yeah, that'd be super. I
get
appreciate
a
that.
feel for them. So we'll maybe if you put some of your contact info in the chat here, if that's okay, Charlie,
Yeah.
um, we can connect that way and go a
Yeah,
little bit more. But I'd love to if there's any questions that you have um, regarding those or the use of them. And Charlie would obviously be able to shed a lot of light on that too, if there's anything. Have you ever used one before, Bill?
no, I have not. No, I
Okay.
have
No, you're gonna hate it because it's only gonna take you about a minute to a minute and a half to stretch a screen.
not.
I mean, I've been involved with Newman. Wow. I got my first Newman frames in 1979, or 78. I forget now. It's been a little
Wow.
while. And then, of course, for the longest time, I did it the traditional way. And even if you're really good, it was a good 10 minutes worth of playing around with it between putting in the locking strips off in the corners, um, and just taking it from there. But once you get used to the panels, there are a couple of things. You're stretching by hand or you're using a stretcher?
By hand.
Okay. Um, you're going to find that the nicest thing is you don't have to think about softening corners. They're already built in. You still have to watch yourself that you don't go overboard on anything, but
Right.
stretching becomes that much easier. You're going to just click the locking strip in, And once you do, it's just boom, boom, bring it up to the tension that you're looking for, and you're there. And if it sounds really simple, it's because it really is. Probably the biggest issue when you're stretching without a stretcher is to make sure that you've got your screen elevated so that the mesh isn't rubbing against your tabletop.
Yes, I use a piece of squeegee blade in each corner.
Yeah. And other than that, shouldn't have any issue at all, really. You're going to do the same thing you always did, get opposites to look somewhat even so that when you do have to retension, it's an easy choice as to which way to go.
How many frames do you have, Bill, of the MZXs?
About 30.
Okay. Have you ever considered looking into a stretching system?
Yeah, I have. I just haven't done it.
We have, there's a couple, Newman has his Roller Master that's out there that uses air. And then we also have a system out there called the Accelerator, and that basically uses an adjustable wrench that hooks onto the hex lug of the frame. You rotate that handle down, and then there's two vertical uprights with a series of holes, and those holes are numbered in there. So as you push that wrench handle down, as you rotate that tube, and you'd have one on each side, so you're rotating everything nice and even, but you do each one independently. You do one at a time, of course. So whatever you do to one long side roller tube, you'd want to do that to the parallel long side as well. So everything's turned nice and even. That's a good thing about the Shur-Lock panels is everything's in a balanced state. We cut it out on laser equipment or on jigs, and every quadrant is exactly the same as long as you have a rectangular type frame. It's not a one with a square bar on it or something like that. So it brings a lot of uniformity. So when you rotate those tubes, you want to make sure that they're rotated very evenly. Right now, you're probably looking at the notches maybe in the corners or something like that, right, to determine rotation, and that works perfectly fine. If you want to look at something that's a little bit more, just cuts off a little bit more time, holds the frame a little bit more securely, so you free up one hand more or less. Right now, if you don't have a hold down bar or something, you maybe have to hold down one side while you rotate. And then once you finish up, as you know, sometimes you can get racking where it can be uneven in the corners. We have an elevated portion where the frame sits on that. The roller frame sits on those elevated portions. So when we put our crescent style wrench on the corner and you rotate that tube around, when the jaw of the wrench itself goes underneath that tube, it doesn't want to pick up. You've got your squeegee blade there, which helps combat that as well, and also keeps the mesh off the deck, like Charlie was saying. But being able to so you load up all four corners, each individual tube has its own wrench, and those wrenches, when you pull it down, you put in a pin through the hole, and that secures the wrench in place as you go. So as you rotate that down, you've got a series of numbering system there, and each number represents a different degree of rotation. So it's really easy to match from one tube to the next, brings a lot of consistency and uniformity to your stretching. And it also allows you, probably one of the best parts, one of the things that we've heard people complain about in the past for roller frames is they just don't love tightening and loosening 8 bolts all the time. So each tube has 2 bolts, as you know, to secure it. So as you rotate around, you're constantly loosening and tightening to kind of stage tension that up as you go. With a system like the Accelerator, you can actually get all the bolts loose to begin with, load in your panel, load on your wrenches, and then as you start to rotate and turn those tubes, those pins are holding it in place. So you don't have to tighten up any of the bolts until you're completely finished and you're at that tension that you want to be. Then tighten them all up, and you're at that you're at that spacing off the edge. And you probably know this from stretching a lot of frames there, Bill, but the technique on how to tighten up the bolts is really critical. A lot of times we'll say to tighten up the downward stroke first, because you've got one bolt that turns, they're both turning right to tight, correct? So you've got to turn them opposite directions. But depending on how you do that, where you position your torque wrench to do that tightening, can really determine if the outcome is going to have more racking or not. And a lot of times we say tighten the downward stroke first, and then the upward stroke on the right hand side, when you're tightening that one, instead of starting down by your hip or starting down low, put the wrench handle up vertical towards the ceiling and then push down towards the frame.
Yes, I do that.
Charlie probably taught us that years ago on kind of dialing that in, and those little things help combat it. But having a stretching unit to not have to loosen and tighten bolts all the time will really save you a lot of time and just labor, and fatigue as you're trying to, achieve a great tension on a high quality screen. So something to consider.
That makes a lot of sense, like explaining how the your system works, because I had seen the system, but I didn't completely understand how it works.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'd be happy I'll send you over some additional information on that. Our main thing is we want to help people, with help solve headaches, help make things a little bit easier, than it was before without our products. So if we can do that for your shop, then that's a win. We're not so much salesmen. We're more of, if it fits, if the shoe fits, then let's get the pair of shoes,
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Glenn, how are you?
Doing good, man. How you guys doing?
Not bad. I was at the FESPA show in Munich last week.
Nice.
It was okay. Nothing to write home about, but what was interesting is more people are going to be going to ITMA than went to FESPA.
Oh.
I tried, but I just couldn't wrangle the trip together. But I definitely wanted to go see ITMA because there's some products that are getting launched there that I really wanted to get some eyes on.
It's interesting. I did ITMA, 2019. ITMA got lucky. Their last show was 2019 before COVID hit, and their next show is right after COVID is out. So they kind of span perfectly. I went to the one in Barcelona, and the screen print area was pretty deserted. You had M&R, you had a handful of companies, all of us located in the upper corner of one of the convention centers. And the show itself is just massive. I mean, I don't know how many millions of square feet, but it's something like 10 to 12 halls that are, and they're big halls, or at least they were in Spain. For this one coming up, all the big boys have decided to come to it, and listening to some of the overseas people, FESPA didn't get anybody from the Asia, India market, etc. They're all going over to ITMA. And what was interesting is I'm in hall 5 for ITMA, and someone said, "Oh, you're going to go and see the new Cornette stuff." I said, "Well, I'm guessing they're in the hall 5." Nope, they're in hall 7. So there must be a hall that is specific to all the digital stuff, maybe digital textile. I'm not sure, but I know that we are in the hall with M&R, etc. And M&R at FESPA had a small island, and David Blake was pretty much it. For ITMA, they're taking their big gun, all of their machines. So it should be a pretty interesting show. Not in love with Milan necessarily, other than the fact that it's great Italian food. But other than that, it's just a big industrial. Have you been?
I've been to Milan, but I haven't been to ITMA.
Milan, I mean, you go there for the Last Supper, you go there for the Opera House and the Cathedral, then you get out of town and go to Como.
I like to take the train up to Bern, Switzerland, go
Oh,
through
well,
the
you were going
Alps.
up to see Sadie.
Yep, Saudi and uh, the big media guy up there, Sill.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've never been invited by Sadie, so I've never gone to that facility, which I understand is magnificent. Um, but when I was out there doing some work, I was on Como and my client was a member of the flying club. So took a plane, did a whole cruise around, flew around all of Lake Como, gave me the steering wheel. It's like, really, I think you may be doing a dangerous thing here because I have enough trouble with a car. Now you're giving me a plane to play with, but that was pretty cool actually. Um, but it's just a brutal show. It's 7 days long.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've got to actually work it. So I'm going to be working for 7 days, which coming off a festival of 4 days was tough enough. But curious to see what they actually come up with in terms of all of the screen and all the digital people that are going to be there. If there's anything you want me to try and take a look at for you, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, actually, Kyocera has announced that they're launching their roll fabric machine that'll compete with MS1, with Kornit's Presto, roll to roll fabric. And, so many machines use Kyocera heads. Be interested to see what they come up with for their own
Yeah.
device, or whether they're just repackaging someone else's.
Yeah, I don't know. Do me a favor. If you want me to look up something for you, just shoot me an email or a text. I'm going to be on WhatsApp. I don't know if you have WhatsApp. I assume
Yep.
you do. WhatsApp it to me because I've got a friend who was with Matsui, not Matsui, Mamaki, and I think he's now, I forget, he's involved on what you're involved with.
Yeah.
And so I would actually just run it past him and have him give me a rundown on what the differences are. So if you can shoot me a message on that, I can pass it over to Mike.
Yeah, I will.
Good. So anyway, I have David from Shur-Lock on. I know you aren't as wrapped up with screen printing as you used to be, but did you ever play with any of the panels or any of the I assume you played with roller frames. I don't know if you ever played with easy frames.
Uh, Actually, when Shur-Lock first was launched, and I think it was part of Tetco at the time,
Yeah.
and I was deep in screen, and I was like, wow, what a time saver. What an easy way to take advantage of a retentionable frame. And uh, yeah, I sold the heck out of those. And then I guess it separated off as its own company. I don't remember the history of that. I'm a little long in the tooth, but I just always felt it was a huge time saver. And just once again, it took one of the biggest disruptive things to our industry, understanding screen tension, and just
Yeah.
made it very simple. Even when I used to teach how to use a roller frame, you know, sequencing of locking down the bars. And this is back where you were doing it all by wrench. And then like you had mentioned, David, uh, the roller table came out from Newman. That made it easy, but it was a little bit of a tough price tag for people to swallow at the time. But once again, it always comes down to, when you look at the cost of ownership of anything you invest in, it's where does it reduce labor? Where does it create consistency? And Shur-Lock panels are awesome. Now, do you guys have your own frames now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have not messed with those at all.
I love them for a couple of reasons, but the main reason, I was always a Newman fan.
Yeah.
being a consultant going into a shop, you see them stacked up against the wall because nobody really wanted to do the maintenance on them.
Ah,
And so that was always the biggest issue with Newman is the initial stretch was one of the things, but then it was the constant retentioning, and most shops just fell apart on that. And so that's why there's a fair amount of used frames on the market, not because they don't work, because they obviously do, but so many shops just don't want to do the maintenance work, which is retentioning. And
Yeah.
so I've gone over to the Easy Frame because, and even on the Easy Frame, they have two versions. I'm still on the first version, which is with the locking strips that are similar to what you use on a Newman frame. It's a one stretch deal and you're done. And I do have a set of the aluminum pieces that you would use for retentioning. I've never used them. You know, to me, it's a one-shot deal. And for 99% of the companies that I've dealt with, they don't want to come back and do anything more. They're happy to go to a very high tension, let it come down to a workable tension, and just hang in there. You know, especially when I'm dealing with new people, the difficulty with the Newman roller frame is it's complex. You know, it doesn't appear to be initially when you're watching someone else, just as it is, you know, when you're watching a race car driver, it's like, oh, there's nothing to driving this car. You know, you just get behind the steering wheel and that's that. Until you get behind the wheel of a car that's really moving quickly and realize that there's a little bit more to it than just holding on to that steering wheel. Well, you know, roller frames, when someone knows what they're doing, it looks like a piece of cake until you get behind and start doing it. With the Easy Frame, it really is pretty much a piece of cake. That being said, I flew to Holland a number of years ago to set up a shop there with them and told them how easy it was. And what do? I shred the first one. Why? Because I decided to start stretching on the short side instead of the long side. So I watched the video, said start on the long side. That was that. I never made that mistake again, but I did make it. And, you know, even when someone tells you how simple it can be, there's always a little something that can jump in there and kind of create an issue. Bill, you know, on your side, I think you're going to find that when you work with a panel, because you're so accustomed to working it the long way, that you're going to just not believe how easy it is. Especially the fact that you don't have to think about softening corners. Yeah, I forgot. I was just with someone who is actually a really good printer, and talking to him, I remember him saying, "Yeah, I got my screens in, you know, my panels, my Newman roller frames in, and started to stretch screens, and it was ripping screen after screen after screen, and he finally called up and said, what am I doing wrong?" And he happened, and it wasn't with panels. This was without panels. And first thing that Newman said was, "Did you soften corners?" And it was like, really? How could I forget softening corners? That's the nicest thing about panels. You don't even think about that. And you don't have the big baggy corners. You just have mildly baggy ones. So kind of a nice thing in that sense. But, you know, you get used to doing something a particular way, and then all of a sudden somebody kind of moves you over 90 degrees on it, and it's like, this is so much easier as long as I remember to do certain things. I think the fact that David will send you a couple of panels to play with is definitely going to make a difference for you. Now, if it were me, I would be pushing you a little bit harder. I'd have you do 230s for your underlay and 305 for your top colors on simulated process. You know, because those panels go to a specified tension, if you were doing it on a stretcher, the way you're doing it, it doesn't. What tension you're not? I can't hear you, but what tension do you bring your screens to?
Usually go tighten them up a little over 25, and then when they get down a little under 25, I'll tighten them back up.
And that's on what mesh count?
Like 156 and
Now
230.
you need to go up to the mid-30s. You do.
Okay.
At 25, not that it's bad. 25 for 305, 22, 23 for 305 is fine. 156 and 230s in the 30 range.
Okay.
You'll find that, especially on an automatic, the quality of your print will improve in terms of the hand, because you're now going to be able to lay the ink on top of the garment instead of pushing it into the garment. And you'll just get a nicer hand out of the whole thing. You'll get a crisper looking image.
Okay. All right. I'll work on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my thing is, as I go into a shop, I've been pushing him to higher mesh counts just because everybody is wanting everything softer. There was a time where they wanted whites that were the whitest thing since, like, that you can imagine. Now they want it white, but they also want it soft. And like, which machine did you end up with?
I have an old tough Freedom.
So you have a flip palette, a flip squeegee on it.
Yes.
You're going to definitely be working hard on that one.
Well,
The flip squeegees are quite tricky. If you try to give it too much pressure, it doesn't flip under. So you've
Right.
got to find that sweet spot where you
Yeah.
get enough pressure to clear it, and it's tricky. But once you got it, you got it.
Well, the first thing I did was when I brought it home, the first thing was to put triple durometer squeegees on it.
Yep. You have for your underlay, you're using a 55, 90, 55 triple, or do you know?
I think it's 60, 90, 60.
Okay. You can also get a 55, 90, 55, which is a little softer and
Okay.
will give you a little bit better lay down. 60, 90, 60 is still a very nice blade. I would use that on my colors, but on my white underlay, I'd go to a 55, 90, 55.
Okay.
And then you're using a hard squeegee on as your flood bar.
Yes.
Yeah, that one is not as much of a concern. They're tricky. How long have you had your machine now?
I bought it in February. Actually got it running in March. At the beginning of March.
Okay, so you've gotten a couple of months out of playing with it.
Yeah, I feel comfortable using it now.
Yeah.
At first it was a lot of, you know, learning the angle and pressure and how to set those, and
It's a trickier machine than most because of that flip squeegee or V squeegee, however they want to call it.
Right.
But like anything else, once you nail it down, once you get accustomed to it, it isn't that big a deal. Since
I'm
you
a lot,
have 30 years of printing under your belt, it makes it a little bit easier. All right. Glenn, what are you up to? What are you doing with yourself nowadays?
Right now I'm kind of in between gigs and
I was going to say, you mentioned that you were
consulting.
potentially moving to another company.
Oh yeah. Well, I may end up doing some consulting for a while. I've had a couple of people reach out to me uh, from the portfolio management and marketing aspects. Some small distributors that can't really afford to bring on a full-time portfolio manager. They want to get into wide format. They want to get into textile. And so I decided, since the job market's a little bit crazy right now, I figured I'd try my own thing and be a portfolio manager in a box.
That sounds
So
intriguing.
I have relationships with all the equipment vendors.
Of course
So
you do.
get them all set up, work on their inventory. I've been doing distribution of equipment and inks and so on for 40 years. Might as well use some of that knowledge and see if I can help some smaller companies. The big companies, obviously, they can afford someone like me. But the smaller companies really can't.
Yeah,
And they make a lot of mistakes in inventory, what product lines to bring in, how to set up service. So I've got one company that just sent over some contracts this morning. And so I may be doing GLM Strategies LLC for a little while.
yeah, I'm putting together my summer road trip, and I do it specifically to work with the smaller companies that can't afford me on my normal basis in terms of the number of days and the amount that I charge. And so for the summer, I knock it down to 1, 2, or 3 days versus 3 to 5 days, and I take care of my own expenses, et cetera. And you know, it's always interesting when you're a consultant. I was talking to someone, I said, you know, the mistake I made the very first time I did a consulting job was I didn't charge enough. And I said, you know, what do you mean? I said, so I charged little enough where they hired a real consultant to come in behind me. And the guy who came in and did it, it looked like he read my report and duplicated it. The difference was he charged enough to make them say ouch a bit. And so they paid attention to him. So that was the only time that I ever ran into that situation. It was a really wonderful learning curve. And so, like I told the guy, look, even when you hire a consultant, it has to hurt your pocket a little bit so you pay attention.
Yeah.
If it doesn't hurt, then they blow it off. And everyone says, yeah, no. If you charge me less, I'll still listen. It's like, no, you don't understand. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that it needs to be something that needs to be addressed, not just listened to, but actually adhered to. And if it's too easy and too inexpensive, then you don't pay any attention.
Couldn't
So,
agree more.
you know, that's part of the song and dance of welcome to my world. I mean, I've been doing consulting since the late 70s,
Yeah.
but full time since 95, where that is the only thing I do, which is frightening because I look back at it, it's like, holy shit, I've been doing it for how long now? But you know, I love consulting. I really do. I think it's a challenge. It's great to walk into a shop, do an assessment, come together, you know, put together a plan and then execute it immediately. And, you know, I've had somebody say to me more than once, why don't you hire somebody else to work with you? And it's like, how do you hire someone to teach them how to walk through a shop and do an analysis? You know, it isn't a financial thing. It's a situation of walking from department to department, looking for certain signs, and then knowing how to put it together and acting on it right now, not coming back saying, hey, I need to sit down and figure this out, and I'll come back to you in a week and put together a game plan. It's like, yeah, I'm going to go through it and we're going to put a game plan together now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think you should, well, obviously you've got 40 years under your belt, so I don't think you're going to run into a whole heck of a lot of problems as far as that goes. And, you know, I think that's really the whole thing. Most consultants that I run into aren't really consultants. They're actually printers that are between jobs. And so to me, that isn't really a consultant. That's someone who is just between jobs and is looking to just make a couple of, you know, bucks while they're looking around. The downside of that is they may be great printers, but the question is, can they teach? Can they really perform in terms of what a consultant has to do? And I think too many owners don't understand that either. That what they're hiring has nothing to do with the fact that the person knows how to print. It's can that person teach your people to do things the right way and a better way?
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah, and having an understanding of the products in the industry too, that you're, you know, as you're going to shop and having that experience to bring it into them is such a part of it. If you've just been a printer and you've been kind of stuck in one spot, you know what you know based off of the other one, but then at the same time you also don't know what you don't know. for what's out there.
I know it's, this is a funny industry. Most of us never went to school for this. This is stuff that we picked up as we
Mhm.
went along. And some people pick it up a little differently than others for whatever reason. We get pushed around a bit and have to come up with solutions. And so, you come up with a workable situation, which is fine. Is it necessarily the best or not? One of the things that I keep pushing, and I had these discussions in Germany, it's like at the show I was printing and I was pushing the squeegee. And of course, everybody who wanted to print wanted to pull. And it's like, let me ask you a simple question. Why do you pull a squeegee? And the answer is, I don't know. That's how they taught me. I said, but did you ever ask the question, why? What's the benefit of one versus the other? I said, I know the benefit of pushing. Do you know the benefit of pulling? And the answer was, no, I didn't know there was any difference really. And it's like, well, let me show you where the difference is and why there is a difference. And let me even take you back, especially from the textile side, as to why people pull the squeegee. And the reason they pull it is because when I got into the industry, there was still a lot of print tables. And you had to pull a squeegee to work a print table because otherwise the screen would move. Well, when you went off the table, you went onto a carousel, you continued pulling. Did it make sense? Well, it's the only thing you knew. And so that's why everybody got into pulling. Then Newman came out with his constant force squeegee, and you had to push. And that's when you realize, wow, I don't have that stress on my wrist. I don't have the stress on my forearm. This really makes a lot of sense. And of course, then I had to learn how to unlearn pulling and start pushing, which I can remember myself talking to myself saying, you got to push as I'm pulling. And it took about a month. It took a month of talking to myself before I finally got to the point where I didn't have to think about it anymore. But always fun to chat with printers about that. So at shows, I make women print. And the reason I do, they never screw up a shirt when they push. If I had them pull, they'd have more ruined shirts than anything else, especially those who've never printed before. So fun stuff. Anyway, that's part of my song and dance. I'll get off of that. Get off of that song and dance now. But that is my question: is if you're going to do something, why are you doing it that way? What's the justification? And if you don't have a justification, then sorry, you lose, because you're just doing a mechanical action. You're not really understanding what you're doing. And so you don't know how to compensate for anything about that. Anyway. Well, we still have some time left if we want, or we can call it a day. That's up to you, David. This is your song and dance. I know you and I started a bit early, but that's all right.
I was just going to ask Glenn where you went back to. Were you working with Techco at the time?
No, I was working for a regional distributor, Joseph Podger Company, who then got bought by Nazdar.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I was a distributor for Techco back then, and that's when I got introduced to the Shur-Lock.
So when I went to see my first Newman roller frame, it was through the Podger Company at the Diplomat Hotel in Hollywood, Florida. It was either 78 or 79. And they gave you a time slot to go upstairs to Don Newman's room to get a song and dance about the screens. So I went up there with a friend of mine, Harry Tucker from England. And the guys who were in front of us were from a big graphics company in New Jersey. They were blown away because this, I guess it was about a 3 foot by 3 foot screen, had 15 Newtons on it. They thought 15 Newtons were the end of the world. So they bought $10,000 worth of screens. So Harry and I are looking at each other and say, well, if they just blew 10 grand, we'll buy a dozen each. Went to England about a year later to Harry's place, and it was still, all his 12 were still sitting against the wall unused because they didn't resemble today's Newman roller frames. The channels were much narrower. there was no such thing as softening corners. And I had tried working with them and failed miserably initially because trying to bring them up to tension was brutal. Eventually I did get to it and became a big fan. But I remember going out to Harry's place and saying, hey, let me show you how to make these work, which kind of blew him away because after sitting there for a year, it was nice to actually put them into action. But that was my first visit with Mr. Newman. And it was through the Podger company.
Yep.
Mhm.
Podger, before NASDAR bought him, was one of the founders, Joe Podger, of what's now Printing United. Back in those days, it was just SPA, Screen Printing Association, and they had a deep history in the screen printing world. What we know as the Printing United Expo used to be held in their facility in New Jersey in the 50s and so on.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we found some old login books, and people from all over the world were coming to this. Well, back then it was a fairly new building in New Jersey. But then I guess it was 98, maybe. NASDAR bought them,
Okay.
and they became part of NASDAR Source One. But man, there's a lot of old war stories about the Podger company.
I'm sure there are. So I did a show for ISS down in Florida.
Mhm.
And so that show was in February at that time. And then the March show was in Philadelphia. My crate got lost.
Oh,
And so we and didn't have enough time to get everything. So we went over to the Podger company and had to buy spatulas and squeegees and the rest. And probably about a year and a half later, a guy comes up to me and said, I just went to a auction of merchandise that trucking company had. And he said, and I bought frames and a tension meter and all of that stuff, and it had your name on it. And it's like, oh, you're the one who ended up with it. And did we ever collect on it? Let's see, today is 2023, and that happened when Podger was still around. I'm still waiting for my check because they only blew about $4,000 worth of my product by losing it. And yeah,
Well, shipping
and
companies
certainly,
haven't
the guy who
changed
bought
much
it, good luck to
since then.
him. I mean, he ended up getting a hell of a job. I think he said he paid $500 for everything. And I
Oh.
told him the meter itself was more money than that. But which didn't bother me. What bothered me was scrambling like hell to try and put a 2-day workshop together inside of an afternoon.
Oh.
And I think I called I owned Bullseye Screen Printing Supplies at the time. I think I called, had them shoot screens and overnight them to us, which I don't even remember what the cost was. It had to be something horrendous. But that was my visit to the Podger company. You guys were in New Jersey at the time, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, they had a Greensboro branch too.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
That branch, NASDAR just closed them down, I guess, in 2016.
Something like that.
But
Yeah.
I
Okay.
remember when we opened that branch, and I was down there. We were doing open houses, demonstrating high tension screens, doing all sorts of fun stuff.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
they had classes there too.
Yep, I used to teach them.
Yeah. Well, I
Oh,
guess
wow.
I know that feeling. I still
probably
do.
met years ago.
I'm almost done with my book on my 45 plus years in the industry, which goes through SPA, SPAI, SPIA, and Printing United. And I've never missed that show. I went to my first one in 77 and never missed one, period.
Wow.
And the only ISS shows that I missed, I was in a hospital twice, couldn't do that. And once I booked my family going to Japan, and it turned out it was during the Orlando show, which was their worst show called them up and they said, nah, just go to Japan, we'll get somebody else. But what most people, and the only other one that I missed was the third show in London. And most people don't know that ISS even did 3 shows in London, but they did.
Hmm.
They did 2 at the
I didn't
Barbican
know that.
Center. Oh yeah, I was one of the speakers. 2 at the Barbican Center and 1 at Wembley. And I did the Barbican ones, but not Wembley. But those are in my book. So whenever I finally finish that, I need to put that out there. But yeah, I've only missed a total of 4 ISS shows. Other than the first one, I sent my partner went to that because I had gone to the SPA show towards the end of the year. But I have the first brochure from the ISS show, which kind of interesting looking. Oh well, fun and games. That's what happens when you're around for too long, actually. But in any event, gentlemen, I am going to call it off. I do have to go and take care of a few other things. Bill, if there's anything I can do, where are you located, by the way?
I'm in Virginia.
Oh, okay. Oh, on my East Coast road trip, I include Virginia, should you be interested.
We may have to talk about that.
Okay, well, getting my Midwest road trip put together right now, and then the East Coast will be in August probably. And so
Okay.
that includes Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, New York, New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be on the Outer Banks for a couple of weeks in August.
I don't blame you. Good time to be there.
Yeah.
One of these days. In any event, gentlemen, hopefully see you all in about 2 weeks or so. Actually, probably not. I'm going to be in Italy. Right after Italy, I will be back.
Outstanding.
And in the interim, Glenn, if you want me to look up anything for you, just text me or whatever.
Yeah,
I'd
I'll
be happy
shoot you a
to.
note. And David, it was nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Congratulations on your product. And William, good to see you again, man.
Good to see you. Good to see
And you,
And-
David, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I-
you coming on.
Yeah.
William, if there's any time, I will be posting this online on a regular basis anyway, but this whole session has been recorded. So should you want to go back to anything, you can go to my website. Probably be up in about another day or 2 generally. And you can just pull it up if you wanted to catch up on anything.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Gentlemen,
Glenn,
have
thank
a
you.
wonderful one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate all of you guys. Appreciate your kind words, Glenn and Bill. Appreciate the opportunity to send you some product. And Charlie, you've just been there, tried and true all along. We really, really appreciate everything that you do. I know it fits well with what you do, but you also have a choice, on what you support and everything. So we greatly appreciate you.
Well, thanks. Gentlemen, have a wonderful day.
Take care.
You
all.
guys do.
Thanks.